The deep, guttural rumble of a diesel engine was the only thing that could drown out the hurricane winds starting to whip through Harmony Creek estates. The flashing yellow lights on the roof of the massive dump truck painted my beige suburban house in strokes of pure apocalyptic chaos. Air brakes hissed like a dragon exhaling, a sound so industrial and out of place here that I saw curtains twitching in windows 2 houses down. This was a neighborhood where the loudest sound was usually someone's overzealous leaf blower. Today, it was the sound of my sanity snapping. Doug, a man built like a refrigerator with a beard to match, leaned his arm out of the cab window. He looked at my house, at the pristine lawn, then back at me, a wild-eyed man standing on his porch in the face of a gathering storm. "All right, Leo," he shouted over the idling engine, his voice a gravelly boom. "You're the boss. Where do you want the 10 tons of all-purpose construction sand?" Across the street, my neighbor Carol, president of the HOA and the architect of my current madness, had her front door open just a crack. Her face, framed by perfectly coiffed hair, was a mask of horrified disbelief. Her mouth was a perfect O of outrage. She thought she had won. She thought her petty tyranny wrapped in the guise of bylaws and covenants was the final word. I gave her a small, tight smile. It was the kind of smile that said, "You have no idea what you've just started." I raised my arm and pointed a single, trembling finger at the center of my meticulously manicured, HOA-approved front lawn. The lawn I was fined for last month because my grass was, and I quote, "a 1/4 inch above the maximum regulated height." "Right there, Doug," I yelled back, a manic grin stretching my face. "Make me a mountain." You're probably wondering how a reasonably well-adjusted, conflict-averse project manager with a passion for vintage arcade games ended up declaring geological warfare on the president of his homeowners association. It's a fair question. The answer, like most suburban horror stories, started with a piece of paper and a lust for absolute power. And, well, sandbags. 24 hours earlier, my world was a much simpler, quieter place. My happy place, my fortress of solitude, was my basement. Upstairs was the world of beige walls, matching furniture sets, and passive-aggressive emails from the HOA. But the basement? The basement was mine. It was a cavern of glorious, flickering neon. The air hummed with the low thrum of transformers and smelled faintly of old electronics and dusty carpet. It was a sanctuary dedicated to the 8-bit gods of my youth. I was carefully polishing the red ball-top joystick of my pristine Galaga machine, watching the demo screen scroll through its attack patterns. To my left, the iconic blue ghost, Blinky, chased Pac-Man across a dark screen. To my right, the light cycles from Tron raced in perfect 90-degree turns. These weren't just games to me. They were 400-pound art installations. They were my life's savings and my life's passion, rescued from dusty warehouses and lovingly restored to their former glory. The thought of anything happening to them was, to put it mildly, unthinkable. The contrast between my vibrant underworld and the surface world of Harmony Creek Estates was stark. Our subdivision was a monument to conformity. Every house was some variation of taupe, greige, or eggshell. The rules were legion, compiled in a 3-ring binder thick enough to stop a bullet, and they were all enforced by the iron will of one woman. I hadn't met her yet, but I knew her by her works. She was the beige witch of Harmony Creek, the all-seeing eye of the HOA. A recent email, printed and taped to my fridge as a reminder of the absurdity, warned me that my recycling bin had been visible from the street for an egregious 7 minutes past the 8 p.m. deadline. Egregious. Who uses that word for a blue plastic bin? The prophecy of my doom came not from a crystal ball, but from a 24-inch television mounted in the corner of the basement. A grim-faced meteorologist was pointing at a swirling vortex of red and orange off the coast. "We are upgrading Hurricane Brenda to a Category 2, he said, his voice heavy with practiced seriousness. "And folks, it looks like it's heading directly for our area. We're expecting significant, localized flooding." My blood went cold. Flooding. The one word that can make a grown man who owns a perfectly restored Donkey Kong cabinet feel like a very small, very breakable child. I looked around at my beautiful machines, my relics, and then at the two flimsy ground-level window wells. My basement wasn't a fortress. It was a bowl waiting to be filled. The panic was immediate and absolute. The local Home Depot was a scene straight out of a disaster movie. The parking lot was a demolition derby of minivans and pickup trucks. Inside, the aisles were a churning sea of humanity. People were grabbing plywood, batteries, bottled water, and Pop-Tarts like the world was ending tomorrow. It was suburban panic in its purest form, and for a moment, I felt a strange sense of camaraderie. We were all in this together. After a 20-minute search that felt like a special ops mission, I found it. The last pallet of sandbags. 50 of them. I heaved them into my cart with the triumphant roar of a man who had just saved his kingdom. I loaded them into the bed of my truck, feeling like a true suburban warrior, a protector of the realm. On the drive home, I called my best friend Sal. "I got them," I said, my voice flush with victory. "The last 50 bags in the county, I think. I'm a protector of the 8-bit realm." "Your realm of blinking lights and 8-bit ghosts?" Sal's voice crackled through the truck's speakers. He worked as a bartender, and his perspective on life was as cynical as it was hilarious. "Dude, if your house floods, just tell people you're opening a barcade. It's trendy." "You are not helping my anxiety," I said, turning onto my street. "Just saying, every crisis is an opportunity, usually for me to drink at your house." I hung up, shaking my head. Back home, the wind was already picking up, carrying the smell of rain and damp earth. I worked for the next hour, my muscles straining, my shirt soaked with sweat. I meticulously stacked the 50 sandbags, creating perfect 2-foot-high walls around my vulnerable basement window wells and the back door. I wasn't a construction worker, but as a project manager, I appreciated precision and order. These were good-looking fortifications. I stepped back to admire my work, feeling a surge of pride. I was prepared. I was an adult. And then I felt a presence. She moved across her chemically green lawn with a silent, unnerving grace, like a shark gliding through beige-colored waters. She was in her mid-50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could withstand the hurricane on its own. She wore a pastel pink polo shirt, khaki capris, and, I swear to God, a visor. In her hand she held a clipboard. It was Carol Miller in the flesh, the beige witch herself. "Leo, a word," she said. Her voice was deceptively sweet, the kind of voice that offers you a poisoned apple. "Carol," I said, forcing a neighborly smile. "Just getting ready for Brenda, battening down the hatches." She didn't smile back. Her eyes scanned my handiwork with cold disapproval. She tapped her clipboard with a perfectly manicured finger. "I see that. And while I appreciate the spirit of preparedness, I'm afraid your fortifications are in direct violation of HOA Covenant 7, Section 4B. I blinked. "Section what now?" "They're sandbags, Carol, for the hurricane that's about to hit us." "Temporary earthen structures," she recited, as if reading from a sacred text. All exterior modifications, temporary or otherwise, require a minimum of 48 hours for review by the Architectural Control Committee, of which, as you know, I am the chair. The sheer, unadulterated insanity of her statement left me momentarily speechless. "The storm is hitting tonight," I finally managed to say. "There isn't time for a committee meeting about sandbags. Rules are what separate us from the animals, Leo," she said, her smile thin and condescending. "These are unapproved, they're unsightly, and the front stack is technically encroaching on a common area easement by 3 inches. They'll have to be removed." "Removed?" My voice cracked. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. "Are you out of your mind? My basement is going to be an aquarium." "Perhaps you should have submitted your paperwork sooner," she said, completely unfazed. "I'll be back in 1 hour. I expect them to be gone. We have standards to maintain, even in the face of a natural disaster." She turned and glided away, leaving me standing there sputtering in a mixture of rage and disbelief. I immediately called Sal. "You will not believe what just happened," I fumed, recounting the entire conversation. "Ignore her," Sal said, his voice laced with amusement. "She's bluffing. What's she gonna do, steal them?" Famous last words. After fuming for a solid 10 minutes, I decided Sal was right. It was an empty threat, a power trip. I went inside to make a stress sandwich and watched the sky turn a sickly shade of green-gray. The wind howled against the windows. I told myself she wouldn't dare. This was America, after all. People don't just steal your emergency supplies on the eve of a natural disaster. 15 minutes later, I looked out the kitchen window, and they were gone. All of them. The neatly stacked walls, the 50 bags of sand, my beautiful fortifications, vanished. My eyes darted around, trying to make sense of the empty space. Then I saw it. The faint, muddy tracks of a small utility trailer on the edge of my lawn, leading directly across the street. I walked to my front door and looked out. And there they were, my 50 sandbags, now stacked neatly and professionally around the foundation and basement windows of Carol Miller's house. The progression of emotion was a tidal wave. First came disbelief, a dizzying sense that I was hallucinating. Then came a cold, creeping confusion. And finally, a surge of pure, incandescent rage. It was a rage so profound it felt calm. She didn't just move them. She didn't just enforce a stupid rule. She quoted the rulebook at me as a pretense to commit grand theft sandbaggery for her own benefit. The beige witch wasn't just a tyrant. She was a hypocritical, thieving tyrant. And that I could not abide. As I stood on my lawn, the first drops of rain beginning to fall, my phone rang. It was Sal. "So, did she come back?" he asked, a chuckle in his voice. "Did she write you a strongly worded letter on HOA letterhead?" My voice, when I answered, was dangerously quiet. "She stole them, Sal." "Stole what? Your will to live? I thought she did that months ago." "The sandbags, all of them. They're at her house right now, protecting her precious collection of decorative plates and Hummel figurines." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then a delighted cackle started to build. "No way," he finally gasped. "Leo, that is a formal declaration of war." "I need to do something," I said, my eyes locked on her house. Something she can't ignore. Something she can't legislate away with a subsection of a bylaw. I need to do something biblical. "You could TP her house," Sal suggested. "Egg her prize-winning roses?" No, that's a kid's game," I said, the wheels in my head starting to turn, lubricated by pure adrenaline. "I'm a project manager, Sal. I deal in logistics. I deal in volume. I need overwhelming force." I love where this is going, Sal said, his voice giddy. What are you thinking? A plague of locusts? Flaming arrows? And then the idea hit me. It was perfect. It was beautiful. It was so ridiculously over the top that it looped all the way back around to being the only logical course of action. A slow smile spread across my face. I was thinking bigger, I said. Hey, you still know that guy Doug? The one with the dump trucks? And that's how I found myself, 3 minutes later, standing on my porch in a hurricane, watching a 10-ton truck back onto my driveway. We returned to the present moment, the roar of the diesel engine, a war drum. Carol was still staring, her little power play world crumbling around her. The truck's massive bed began to tilt upwards with a hydraulic groan. The tailgate lock clanged open. For one glorious, satisfying second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deafening, magnificent whoosh, 10 tons of sand poured onto my lawn, burying my petunias, my walkway, and every last shred of my conflict-averse nature. It was petty. It was disproportionate. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The mountain of sand grew with terrifying speed, a brown avalanche in the heart of suburbia. It consumed my prize-winning petunias, which Carol had once passive-aggressively complimented as surprisingly vibrant for this side of the street. It swallowed the slate walkway I had spent 2 weekends laying. When the truck's bed was finally empty, a 10-ton dune sat on my front lawn, a monument to spite. Doug leaned out of the cab. "That about right?" he shouted over the engine's dying roar. I was laughing, a wild, unhinged sound that was probably scaring my other neighbors. "It's a beautiful start, Doug," I yelled back. "Send me the bill." As Doug's truck rumbled away, the storm hit in full force. The sky opened up, and a rain came down in solid, wind-driven sheets. But I was a man possessed. I grabbed a shovel from the garage and charged into the deluge. For the next hour, I was a whirlwind of frantic activity, soaked to the bone, mud splattering my face. I wasn't just moving sand, I was sculpting my rage. I built a massive, impenetrable berm around my entire foundation, a fortress of grit and pettiness that dwarfed Carol's stolen, pathetic little wall. I was soaked, shivering, and exhausted, but I was victorious. The next morning, the world was washed clean. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of brilliant, unapologetic blue. I crept down to my basement, my heart pounding. I flicked on the light. It was bone dry. The neon glow of Tron reflected off the dry, concrete floor. My children were safe. I made a pot of coffee, the strongest I could manage, and looked out my front window. My lawn was gone, replaced by what looked like a miniature Sahara. And across the street, oh, sweet schadenfreude, across the street was a scene of beautiful, karmic destruction. Carol's perfectly stacked wall of my sandbags had been overwhelmed. A section had given way, and a torrent of muddy water had cascaded directly into her award-winning rose garden. The pristine beds were now a swamp of mangled thorns and ruined blossoms. I was sipping my coffee, savoring the view, when a figure approached my house. It was Maya, my neighbor from 2 doors down. She was a landscape architect who worked from home, and we'd exchanged pleasantries but never really talked. She was holding 2 steaming mugs and had a deeply amused smile on her face. "Morning," she said, handing me one of the mugs. It was coffee, and it was good. "I see you've gone for the, post-apocalyptic desert aesthetic. Bold choice for Harmony Creek." "It's for drainage," I said with a straight face. "Very eco-friendly, prevents runoff." "Right," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I also see Carol's prized Queen Elizabeth roses are now a mud bog. Any connection?" "Karma is a funny thing, isn't it?" I said, feigning innocence. "So is proper sandbag placement. It's a real science. You have to account for hydrostatic pressure." Maya laughed, a genuine throaty sound. "You're completely insane. I like it. But you do realize this means war, right? She's not going to just let this go?" "She fired the first shot, Maya," I said, taking another sip of coffee. "I just responded with superior firepower." Superior firepower, it turned out, was something that attracted the attention of the local authorities. 2 days later, just as I was contemplating what one does with 10 tons of sand, 2 police cars pulled up to the curb. Out stepped a grizzled, weary-looking officer who looked like he'd been 2 weeks from retirement for the last 10 years, and a younger, crisper officer who looked like he'd just graduated from the academy yesterday. Carol was already on her porch, poised for a dramatic performance. She pointed a trembling finger at my sand dune as if it were a rampaging monster. "Officers, thank God you're here," she cried. This maniac has created a public nuisance. It's a blight. Children could get lost in it." The older cop, whose name tag read Miller, sighed the sigh of a man who had seen the absolute depths of petty human squabbles and found them wanting. "Okay, ma'am, just calm down, sir," he said, turning to me. "What's with the sand?" I had rehearsed for this. I was calm. I was reasonable. I was going to be utterly infuriating. "Flood prevention, officer," I said politely. "My property. The storm, you know. Better safe than sorry." The younger cop, Davis, flipped open his notepad with a flourish. "Is there a city ordinance regarding the volume of landscaping materials one can have on their property at a given time?" he asked earnestly. Miller shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Kid, don't. Just don't," he muttered. He turned back to me. "So it's just sand, on your own lawn?" "That is correct, officer," I confirmed. "And you're not selling it, or running some kind of illegal, unlicensed beach resort?" "Not unless the market for suburban beach resorts suddenly takes off, no, sir?" Miller nodded slowly, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his tired eyes. He turned back to Carol. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but it's his property. It's not a crime to have terrible taste in landscaping." "But the HOA bylaws?" Carol sputtered, her face turning a blotchy red. "Not our department," Miller said, already turning to leave. "That's a civil matter. Have a nice day." As they got back in their cars, Miller caught my eye and gave me a look that was 1 part annoyance and 2 parts grudging respect. I offered Carol a polite, infuriating little wave. She stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard I thought her windows might shatter. Round 1 to me. My victory was short-lived. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived. It was thick and heavy with the promise of bad news. It was from the HOA's legal counsel. The letter informed me, in no uncertain terms, that I was being fined $100 per day, retroactive to the day of the sand delivery, for the unapproved and aesthetically disruptive landscaping feature. It went on to threaten liens on my property, further legal action, and a whole host of other financial plagues. The elation I had felt vanished, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. Carol was playing hardball. This wasn't just a feud anymore. This was a war of attrition, and she had the HOA's war chest on her side. The fines were already piling up. I couldn't just leave a mountain of sand on my lawn forever. I called Sal in a panic. "They're fining me into oblivion, Sal," I said, pacing my kitchen. "I might have to get rid of the sand. Surrender." "No!" Sal's voice was sharp. "You can't surrender. That's what she wants. You need to double down." "Double down how? Buy more sand? Build a moat?" "No, you idiot," he said, and I could hear the gears turning in his head. "You have to make it permanent. You have to make it an official project, something they can't fight with fines. You need to use their own stupid rules against them, Hey, didn't you say your cute neighbor Maya is a landscape architect? I stopped pacing. A slow, brilliant, and terrifying idea began to form in my mind. Sal, I said, you are an absolute genius. I found Maya in her front yard, tending to a small garden that was, unlike Carol's, a beautiful and chaotic mix of wildflowers and native grasses. I approached her with the cautious energy of a man about to ask an enormous, insane favor. So, I have a crazy idea, I started, trying to sound casual. What if it's not a pile of sand? She raised an eyebrow. Go on. What if it's a biodiverse, multi-level xeriscape dune garden with native grasses and drought-resistant flora? Maya stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she threw her head back and burst out laughing. Oh my God, she gasped, wiping a tear from her eye. You want me to draw up professional, city-ready blueprints for your spite dune? I'll pay you, obviously, I said quickly. And I'll buy you dinner for a month. Please, Maya, it's the only way. I have to fight her bureaucracy with more bureaucracy. I need to weaponize paperwork. She was still smiling, a wide, mischievous grin. Okay, fine, I'm in. But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. We're going all out. We'll add a meandering dry creek bed feature for enhanced storm runoff management, and strategically placed ornamental boulders to create visual interest and ecological microclimates. We'll make it so ridiculously official, so packed with pretentious landscape architecture jargon, that her head will explode. I had never been more attracted to anyone in my life. My next call was to Doug. Doug, it's Leo, I said. The sand guy. A deep, hearty laugh boomed through the phone. Hey, sand guy, what's up? Need another mountain? Even better, I said. I need you to shape this one. And I need more stuff. Boulders, river stones. I'm hiring you and your crew. I've got professional blueprints. We're building a dune garden. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by the biggest laugh yet. A spite dune, he bellowed. I love it. My guys are so bored of digging septic tanks. We'll be there Monday. Leo, this is the best damn job I've had all year. The stage was set for the HOA meeting. It was held in the community center's sad, beige meeting room, which smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. The room was packed. Apparently, my sand dune was the most exciting thing to happen in Harmony Creek since someone planted non-regulation petunias in 2017. Carol was at the front, running the meeting with the smug authority of a petty dictator. And that brings us to item 7, she announced, her eyes glinting. The egregious and unresolved violation at 112 Arbor Lane. She launched into a 5-minute tirade, painting me as a suburban terrorist who had single-handedly destroyed the neighborhood's property values with my monstrous pile of filth. She was just about to call for a formal vote on placing a lien on my property when I stood up. Madam President, I said, my voice calm and clear. If I may. Carol's eyes narrowed. This is a closed discussion on the board's enforcement actions, Leo. I believe it pertains to my property, I said, walking towards the front of the room. So I'd like to take this opportunity to present the HOA with my formal application for landscape modification, as per Covenant 8, Section 2A, which I believe is well within the 30-day submission window. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. With Maya at my side for moral support, I reached the front table and unfurled the blueprints with a dramatic snap. They were beautiful, professionally rendered, with detailed callouts, elevation markings, and a full planting schedule. I picked up the laser pointer from the lectern. As you can see, I began, my voice filled with the practiced confidence of 1,000 project status meetings. Our design focuses on xeriscaping principles to promote water conservation. The strategic placement of these 300-pound ornamental boulders will improve sightlines from the street, while the dry creek bed feature will channel storm runoff in a controlled manner, preventing soil erosion. The native grasses are not only aesthetically harmonious with the natural environment, but they also require minimal maintenance. The homeowners were leaning forward, intrigued. A few were openly snickering. I watched Carol's face as I spoke. I saw it shift from smug satisfaction to confusion to sputtering rage, and finally to a state of shocked, horrified silence. I had her. I had followed her precious rules to the absolute letter. I had submitted a professional plan through the proper channels. She couldn't arbitrarily deny it without opening the HOA up to a massive lawsuit for selective enforcement. I had built a cage for her out of her own bureaucracy, and she had walked right into it. I clicked off the laser pointer. "I look forward to the committee's timely approval," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing slightly in the stunned silence. Check and mate. The HOA committee, trapped by their own regulations, had no choice but to conditionally approve my plan pending city review. Carol was forced to suspend the daily fines. It was a major victory, but I knew she wouldn't give up. The war had just entered a new phase. The next Monday, Doug's crew arrived. A bobcat skid steer rolled off a trailer and onto my lawn, its engine roaring to life. The neighborhood became live dinner theater. People set up lawn chairs on their porches to watch the construction. I became a reluctant folk hero, the William Wallace of Harmony Creek, fighting for freedom from beige tyranny. People I'd never spoken to would give me a thumbs up as they drove by. Carol, however, began a campaign of guerrilla warfare. The siege was on. She called the police to file a noise complaint. Officer Miller showed up, took a decibel reading from the bobcat that was well within legal limits, and gave me a look that said, "Really? Again?" She called animal control, claiming she'd seen an endangered silvery Phacelia gopher burrowing into my dune. A very bored-looking man came out with a net, poked around for 10 minutes, and declared my lawn officially gopher-free. She printed out terrifying articles from the internet about the dangers of sinkholes caused by improper soil grading and left them in my mailbox, highlighted in yellow. But her persistence finally paid off. One afternoon, a man in a crisp white shirt and a hard hat showed up, clipboard in hand. He wasn't from the police or animal control. His truck said City Planning and Inspection. This was the real deal. His name was Mr. Henderson, and he did not look like a man who enjoyed amusing anecdotes. "Mr. Maxwell," he said, his eyes scanning my half-finished project. "Just a routine permit review." I was confident. Maya's plans were flawless. Doug's work was impeccable. "Of course, Mr. Henderson. Let me show you around." He spent 30 minutes walking the site, making notes. He was silent, methodical, and utterly unnerving. He was not looking at my grand artistic vision. He was looking for tiny, fractional deviations from the city code. "Well, Mr. Maxwell," he finally said, and my stomach clenched. "Your plans are mostly in order. Your grading is good, your material is stable, your boulder placement meets safety setbacks." A wave of relief washed over me. "Great, so we're all good?" "Almost," he said, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine. "I notice your dry creek bed feature will be channeling storm runoff directly into a municipal drain line at the curb. As per City Ordinance 1138C, subsection 4, any modification to storm runoff drainage patterns requires a full, independent hydrological survey and a separate diversion permit. I'm afraid I have no choice but to issue a stop work order until you can provide one." He pulled a large, bright red sticker from his clipboard and slapped it squarely on my front window. The words, "Stop Work Order," screamed in bold black letters. Carol was watching from her porch, a triumphant, venomous smile spreading across her face. She had won. A hydrological survey I knew from my job could take months and cost thousands of dollars I didn't have. I would have to tear it all down. My beautiful, ridiculous monument to spite was dead. Defeat tasted like ash. I sat on my porch that evening, staring at the red sticker on my window, the symbol of my failure. The half-finished dune looked pathetic now, a sad pile of dirt. Sal called with a series of increasingly terrible and illegal suggestions. Let's just fill the creek bed with concrete in the middle of the night. What's he gonna do, unpour it? I was explaining the situation to Maya, who was sitting beside me, a thoughtful frown on her face. She won, I said, my voice flat. She actually won. She beat me with an obscure city ordinance from the Stone Age. No, she didn't, Maya said softly. He did, the inspector. The rules are the rules. We can be mad at her, but he was just doing his job. But maybe he wasn't looking at all the rules. What do you mean? This subdivision is old, she said, a spark lighting in her eyes. The rules change. Sometimes old ones get grandfathered in. Sometimes things get missed when land is rezoned. Let me do some digging. As a landscape architect, Maya had professional access to the city's labyrinthine online planning databases. She spent the rest of the night lost in a world of digital property records, historical surveys, and zoning maps from the 1950s. Meanwhile, I got another call from Sal. Okay, new plan, he said, his voice buzzing with conspiratorial energy. My cousin's wife's brother, Vinny, works for the city planning department. He files things. He owes me because I know what happened at his bachelor party in Vegas. He said he'd look up your property for a case of craft beer. What's the address? You have a cousin in city planning? I asked, bewildered. I have a cousin for everything, my friend. It's a gift. The next morning, just as the sun was rising, my phone buzzed with an email from Sal with the subject line, Vinny the Rat says hi. Attached was a scanned, grainy document. Moments later, Maya knocked on my door, her eyes wide with excitement, a sheaf of printed papers in her hand. We laid our findings out on my kitchen table. And there it was, the loophole. Our subdivision had been built on land that used to be a commercial plant nursery in the 1950s. When the land was rezoned for residential use in the 60s, a lazy clerk had failed to remove an old agricultural easement from the property deeds on my side of the street. This easement, Vinny's document confirmed, was still technically active. It gave homeowners the right to erect temporary or permanent structures for the purposes of soil and water management. My dune garden, my beautiful spite dune, fit the description perfectly. It superseded the modern drainage ordinance Henderson had quoted. My project was 100% legal. But that wasn't the smoking gun. That was just my get-out-of-jail-free card. The smoking gun was on the other printout, the one Maya had found. It was the original survey map of the subdivision. And it showed that Carol's property, at the end of the cul-de-sac, had a massive 15-foot utility easement running along her entire back fence line, giving the city access to underground power and sewer mains. And the magnificent, multi-level redwood deck she had built 10 years ago, the one she'd won the Garden of the Year award for, the one she hosted all her smug HOA parties on, was built almost entirely on top of it. It was a massive, permanent, and spectacularly illegal encroachment. If the city ever found out, they wouldn't fine her. They would force her to tear the entire thing down at her own expense. I held the two pieces of paper in my hand. One was the key to my freedom. The other was the key to her utter destruction. I felt a dizzying, terrifying sense of power. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the city. This wasn't going to be a public spectacle. This was going to be a quiet, personal checkmate. With the two printouts tucked into a manila folder, I walked across the street. The sun was warm, the birds were singing. It was a beautiful day for an unconditional surrender. I knocked on her door. She answered, a smug, pitying look on her face, clearly expecting me to beg for mercy. "Leo," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Have you come to tell me you're finally removing that eyesore?" "No, Carol," I said calmly. "I came to offer a truce." She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "A truce? You've lost, Leo. There's nothing to negotiate." "I think there is." I opened the folder and handed her the first document, the agricultural easement. I watched her read it, saw the smugness in her eyes flicker and die, replaced by confusion. Then I handed her the second document, the survey map with the utility easement and the outline of her deck clearly marked in red. I watched the color drain from her face. I saw her hand tremble, just slightly. She knew exactly what it meant. "So, here's the deal," I said, my voice low and even. "You are going to go down to the HOA office this morning, and you are going to rescind every fine they've levied against me. You are going to remove every complaint. You are going to sign a full and final approval for my landscaping project, effective immediately. And then you and I are going to pretend the other doesn't exist. In return, this survey map gets lost in my shredder, and I won't feel the sudden pang of civic duty to report a major, multi-thousand-dollar code violation to Mr. Henderson at the city inspector's office." Her voice was a choked whisper. "You wouldn't." I met her gaze, and for the first time, she looked away. "Carol," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You stole 50 of my sandbags 10 minutes before a hurricane because you didn't like how they looked. Try me." The red stop work order was gone from my window by noon. An email from the HOA arrived at 2 p.m., confirming that all fines had been rescinded and my project was fully approved. A week later, the dune garden was finished. And the crazy thing was, it looked amazing. The boulders were sculptural. The native grasses swayed beautifully in the breeze, and the dry creek bed wound through it all like a natural feature. Maya had even helped me build a small bench into the side of the dune, creating a perfect little porch nook. It was, without a doubt, the most interesting piece of landscaping in the entire subdivision. My war with Carol was over. She was a ghost. We never spoke again. If we passed on the street, she would find something intensely interesting to look at on the other side of the road. Her reign of terror had ended not with a bang, but with a rustle of incriminating paper. Maya and I were sitting on the new bench one evening, drinking beers and watching the sunset. Her head was on my shoulder. It was official. The spite dune had brought us together. "You know," she said, "for a monument to pure pettiness, it's actually quite beautiful." "It's not a spite dune," I corrected her gently. "It's a biodiverse, multi-level xeriscape dune garden." She laughed, and I kissed her. And in that moment, it was all worth it. A year later, a U-Haul truck was parked down the street. A new family was moving in. We decided to be good neighbors, so Maya and I walked over with a 6-pack of beer as a welcome gift. We introduced ourselves to the young couple who were wrestling a couch through their front door. "Thanks so much," the husband said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Everyone seems so nice here. Hey, we're thinking of putting up a new fence in the backyard. Is the HOA pretty chill about that stuff?" Maya and I exchanged a long, knowing look. A slow grin spread across my face. I cracked open a beer and handed it to him. "Pull up a chair," I said. "Let me tell you a story about sand."